Hello, hello, fourth grade. Here's our Thursday math lesson. We're talking about finding or understanding common decimals and fractions. So I'm going to give you examples of 3 common fractions, and we're going to turn them into decimals and talk about it. Then I'm going to give you some practice problems to do with me, and you're going to go on and con. So first one we're going to talk about is 1/5. Take a second to write that down, 1/5. So when I'm thinking about turning that number into a decimal, well, one option would be to do 1 divided by 5, literally 1 divided by 5, right? But that seems like more work than I want to do, and I know some things about fractions that this may be able to help me with. So I'm not going to do that. You would get the same answer, and it's a possibility, but we're going to do it a little bit differently. What I know about with decimals and fractions, okay, is that tenths and hundreds are really easy to turn into decimals. So with that in mind, I want to turn my 1/5 into tenths, okay? So to go from a fifth to a tenth, all I need to do is multiply by 2. 5 times 2 is 10. We have to do the same thing with our numerator now that we changed our denominator. We're going to multiply our numerator, which is 1, by 2, and we will get 2/10. Okay. Now, this 2/10 is the same thing as 1/5, which is why I have that equal sign there. Okay. I can turn this into a decimal way easier now because I know tenths really well in my head. Okay, so my 2/10 as a decimal, you should write this down, is 0.2. These are all the same. And I was able to quickly go into tenths because I know my facts there. Okay, so that's a common one you will see. The next common fraction, okay, that we're going to turn into a decimal. So actually what I want you guys to do here is on whatever paper you're working on, find a section, and I want you to write 1/5 equals 0.2, like this, like it's kind of like your little notes off to the side. Okay, the next one we're going to deal with is 1/4. So your little notes off to the side, just have a 1/4 ready, okay? And we're going to do the work. I'm going to do it on a separate board. You can do it on the same paper, whatever you guys want to do, but I'm just going to keep these separate here. So my 1/4. We're going to do the same thing. Let's think about how could we turn this into a fraction that we know how to deal with, so tenths or hundreds. Well, I could try to go to tenths, but the problem is 4 is not a factor of 10, meaning 10 is not a multiple of 4. So we can't multiply any like normal whole number by 4 to get 10. So that kind of leaves us with one other option, hundredths. Okay, so get this written down here. How can we go from a 4 using multiplication to 100? Well, if you think about money and quarters, okay, quarters are worth 25 cents, and you need 4 of them to get $1, which is 100 cents. So what are we going to multiply by? 25. 4 times 25 equals 100, so that's changing our denominator to hundredths. Now we have to do the numerator. 1 times 25 gets me 25 hundredths. Remember, you can pause whenever you need to write this stuff down. Okay, finally, we're going to write this as our decimal. So we know hundreds. We know what that place value looks like. So we're going to write 0.25 or 25 hundredths. Okay, or you could think of it as 2/10 and 5 hundredths. Same thing, they're all equal. Okay, I'm going to add that 1/4 is equal to 0.25 to my kind of common fraction notes off to the side here. Okay, that might help me on con later. the last common fraction and decimal that we're working with is 1/2. This is probably the one that you're most familiar with. Okay, so write that on your side notes here, and I'm going to do the work on a separate board. 1/2. Okay, so we are going to think about tenths or hundredths here. You can actually use both, and I'll show you both ways. Let's start with tenths. So if I want to go from 1/2 to tenths, okay, let's think about what do we multiply 2 by to get 10? 5. We're going to have to do that to the denominator here, and we also have to do it to our numerator, which is 1. So 2 times 5 is 10, that's our denominator. 1 times 5 is 5. Okay. So 1/2 is the same thing as 5/10 because 5 is half of 10, 1 is half of 2. Okay. Now we know how to write tenths as decimals. We're going to write 0.5. Easy peasy lemon squeezy? I hope so. I'm going to quick show you how you could do this with hundredths. 1/2 the hundredths. So I know that there's one extra 0 here in my hundreds, okay, versus 10. So I just need to add zeros here. So instead of multiplying by 5 for my numerator and denominator, I'm actually going to multiply by 50, okay, times 50. So I get 1/2 is equal to 50 hundredths. If I was writing that as a decimal, I would write 0.50. Okay, and remember, these are the same, you guys. These are all the same. I just put that invisible 0 here so you could see that they're actually the same number. They all represent the same thing. Okay, so on your side notes here, 1/2, one of our common fractions and decimals, is the same thing as 0.5. Okay, you could put the 0 there at the end for hundredths if you want. It is up to you. So those are our commons, our common fractions and decimals that we're going to use. These are going to be really useful for you, not only for math now and later on in your life, but just in everyday life in general. It's really nice to know how to go back and forth between these. And eventually, my friends, when you have enough practice, you don't need to do all of this work. You'll just kind of have it in your head, but that's why we practice now, so that later in your life, you'll just be able to be like, boop, 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 I got it. Okay, so get these written down. We're going to do 4 practice problems, and I might throw you off here a little bit because, actually, we're just going to do 3 practice problems. I'm actually going to start out as a decimal, and we're going to talk about how to go to a fraction, okay? So the first one I want you to write down is 0.4, okay? Or we know that as 4/10. Oh, what's really cool about this is if you see that decimal and you say it as 4/10, you already know how to write it as a fraction, okay? 0.4 is the same thing as 4/10 or 4/10. Okay, here's the deal with this one though, my friends. I can reduce this down to something simpler. Okay, think back for a moment to when we did our 1/5. 1/5 is the same thing as 0.2, right? Isn't that just half of 0.4? So couldn't we, okay, think about this like we did with our fifths. What if we divided our numerator and denominator by 2? Because I can go do 10 divided by 2. I get a new denominator. It's a 5th. Okay. If I divide 4 by 2, my numerator, look what I get. 2/5. So let me show you that in a little bit of a different way. If we're thinking about 0.4, okay, and I'll hold this up so you can write it down in a second. 0.4, okay, is the same thing as 2 times 0.2, right? 0.4 is the same thing as 2 times 0.2. We know that 0.2 from our notes off to the side, right, is 1/5. So we could also write this as 2 times 1/5. And what's 2 times 1/5? 2/5. Okay, the same thing as 2 So this is an example of using those common fractions and decimals that we already know and we've written down to help us understand a little more complicated one. All right, let's do another. The next one we're going to do is 0.6. This one is also as 6/10. Now, I hope that your wheels are turning in your head already with this one because I know that 6 is a multiple of 2, right? And we just talked about that 0.2 is the same thing as 1/5. So if I have 6/10 or 0.6, okay, isn't that the same as 3 times 0.2 or 2/10? 3 times 2/10. Yeah, it absolutely is. And what do we know that 2/10 is the same as? 1/5. So I could also write this as 6/10 is the same as 3 times 1/5. So what are we going to end up with, y'all? 3 times 1/5, think about it. 0.6 is the same thing as 3/5. Okay. Another way you could look at it is that 0.6 or 6/10 is like 6/10. Okay. And then you can realize I can still divide these numbers by 2 to get it to its very simplest form. And when I divide 6/10, each the numerator and denominator by 2, okay, I get, you guessed it, 3/5. Okay. 6/10 is the same thing as 3/5. Again, we used that 1/5 that we already knew to analyze something a little more complicated. Okay. Our last practice problem, my friends, is 0.75 or 7/500. Okay. Now let's talk about and look at the notes we took off to the side. Okay. Do you see any one of these common fractions, decimals that we could talk about this with and turn it into a fraction? I see one. I'm thinking about money again. I'm thinking about quarters, okay? Because 25 cents is a quarter. And I know that if I have 3 quarters, I have 75 cents. And this is 0.75. So let's talk about that for a second. 25 times 3 is 75, okay? So isn't 0.75 or 7/500ths? Oh, I'm going to write this a little differently. Hold on. The same thing as 3 times 0.25? Yes, it is. We also know from our notes here that 0.25 or 25/100 is the same as the fraction 1/4. So we could also write this as 0.75 is equal to 3 times 1/4. And what do we end up with as our final answer? 0.75 or 7/500 is the same thing as 3/4. There you are. Okay. So those are a few practice problems for you. I will provide the link to the Khan Academy video if you want to do that as an extra lesson. But there are going to be 2 assignments for you to do. One is decimals to fractions. One is fractions to decimals. Use your notes to help you, okay? Come back to this if you need to. Let me know if you have any questions. All right, my friends, good luck. See you later. Bye. Oh, wait, hold on. I need to show you Barley, don't I? She's so cute. Barley. Hey, Baba. Are you the cutest? Oh. Okay, for real.